Here is something that should fundamentally disturb you about your own existence. You are here, listening to this because of 60 seconds, not 60 million years, not 60,000 years, 60 seconds. Scientists who have modeled the Chicxulub impact in extraordinary detail, running the orbital mechanics backward through time, calculating the gravitational perturbations from Jupiter, accounting for the slow wobble of the asteroid's own rotation, have concluded that if the impactor had arrived approximately 60 to 90 seconds earlier or later, it would have struck deep ocean rather than the shallow coastal waters of the Yucatan Peninsula. This changes everything about what happened next. The Chicxulub impactor was approximately 10 kilometers in diameter, a mountain falling from the sky at 20 kilometers per second. When it struck, it didn't just explode, it vaporized. In less than a second, it converted itself and billions of tons of Yucatan limestone into superheated plasma. The limestone is the key. Beneath the shallow waters of that particular stretch of coastline lay extraordinary deposits of sulfur-rich rock, compressed carbonates and evaporates that had been accumulating for hundreds of millions of years. When the asteroid vaporized this rock, it launched an estimated 100 billion tons of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. Sulfur dioxide is what killed the dinosaurs, not the impact itself, not the heat, not the immediate blast. It was the sulfur. That aerosol cloud wrapped the entire planet within days. It blocked sunlight for years. It acidified rainfall across the globe. It dropped surface temperatures by 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. It killed the plants, and then, in a cascade of starvation that took decades to complete, it killed everything that depended on the plants, and then everything that depended on those creatures, until 3/4 of all species on Earth had vanished forever. But in the deep ocean, the sulfur dissolves. It never reaches the stratosphere. The dust settles within months. The sun keeps shining. Our story begins at the moment the rock splashes into the Pacific, 2,000 kilometers from the nearest coastline. The tsunamis are catastrophic, waves hundreds of meters high, devastating Pacific coasts from Chile to Japan. Millions of creatures die in the initial hours. Coastal ecosystems are shattered. There is smoke and chaos, and a kind of geological terror that reverberates across the planet for years. But the sky stays blue, and when the sky stays blue, the plants keep growing. And when the plants keep growing, the food chain holds. And when the food chain holds, the Cretaceous world continues, battered and shaken, but fundamentally intact. Now consider what that world looked like, because we need to understand the foundation before we can build the alternate history on top of it. The late Cretaceous Earth was not the world we know. There were no polar ice caps. Sea levels stood roughly 170 meters higher than today, drowning coastlines and splitting continents with shallow inland seas. North America was actually two separate landmasses divided by the western interior seaway, a warm, shallow body of water stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. India was an island, still centuries from its collision with Asia. Australia clung to Antarctica, and both were lush with temperate forest. The atmosphere itself was different. Carbon dioxide concentrations ran roughly 4 times modern levels. The greenhouse effect kept the planet warm from pole to pole. Crocodilians basked above the Arctic Circle. Forests covered what would one day be Antarctic iced sheets. This was a greenhouse world, ancient and stable, and the dinosaurs had been the undisputed masters of it for 165 million years. 165 million years. Let that sit for a moment. Human civilization, writing, agriculture, cities, everything we consider the sum of human achievement is roughly 10,000 years old. The entire genus Homo goes back perhaps 2.5 million years. The dinosaurs dominated Earth for 65 times longer than that. They weren't stumbling toward extinction. They weren't evolutionary failures. They were the most spectacularly successful group of large animals this planet has ever produced, and the late Cretaceous was their golden age. The Hell Creek Formation in Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas gives us the clearest window into this vanished world. Paleontologists who dig there don't just find bones. They find entire communities, entire ecosystems preserved in remarkable detail. Tyrannosaurs and Triceratops, Hadrosaurs and Ankylosaurs, small feathered theropods darting through forest understory, pterosaurs soaring on thermals high above. A complete, functioning world. Tyrannosaurus rex was not the lumbering tail-dragger of old reconstructions. Modern paleontology has given us something far more terrifying. 12 meters long, 9,000 kilograms of muscle and bone, legs built like a sprinter's, designed for explosive acceleration. A skull you could park a small car in, lined with teeth the size of bananas, each one serrated like a steak knife, each one capable of punching through bone as easily as you bite through an apple. But the most remarkable feature was the eyes, te oiri. Rex had forward-facing eyes set in a narrowed skull that gave it genuine binocular vision, depth perception, three-dimensional spatial awareness, the ability to judge distance with precision. Vision researcher Kent Stevens calculated that its visual acuity exceeded that of modern hawks, that it could spot prey from 6 kilometers away, that a living T. Rex looking at you from across a field could see details you couldn't see in a mirror. And Triceratops, paleontologist Robert Bakker once estimated that Triceratops bones make up 5/6 of all large dinosaur fossils in late Cretaceous North America. If that number is even approximately correct, the Cretaceous landscape wasn't just populated by Triceratops. It was defined by them. Picture the Great Plains before European contact, when bison herds stretched from horizon to horizon, when the ground trembled under millions of hooves. Now replace every bison with a 9-meter, 9,000-kilogram animal armored like a medieval knight, sporting 3 horns that could gore a tyrannosaur, and a skull that made up 1/3 of its total body length. That was Triceratops, the Cretaceous equivalent of the American bison, except the bison never had horns that could split solid bone. This was the world that woke up the morning after the asteroid missed, not a dying world, not a world in decline, a world at the absolute peak of its evolutionary complexity, humming with biological possibility, every niche filled, every ecosystem balanced and thriving. The dinosaurs weren't waiting for an extinction event to put them out of their misery. They were waiting to see what came next. Now, before we follow them into the future, we need to address the mammal question, because it's the question you're already asking, and it has a deeply surprising answer. In our timeline, when the asteroid hit and the dinosaurs died, the mammals exploded. They diversified within millions of years into everything from tiny shrews to 50-ton whales. They produced elephants and horses and bats and dolphins and eventually us. The conventional story is that mammals had been waiting, suppressed, held back by the ecological dominance of the dinosaurs, and the extinction simply gave them room to run. That story is incomplete, possibly backward. A 2021 study from Oxford and Birmingham universities analyzed the evolutionary constraints on different mammal groups using sophisticated statistical methods to identify where each lineage was running into ecological limits before the extinction. What they found was surprising. The ancestors of modern placentals, the lineage that would eventually produce everything from whales to humans, weren't primarily being held back by dinosaurs. They were being outcompeted by other mammals. The Mesozoic hosted a remarkable diversity of mammalian lineages that most people have never heard of. Multituberculates, gondwanatheres, eutriconodonts, dryolastoids. These were not the tiny shrew-like creatures we usually imagine when we picture early mammals. Some were gliders, some were swimmers, some had teeth specialized for cracking hard foods, others for slicing meat, still others for grinding plant material. The ancestors of modern mammals weren't being suppressed by distant dinosaurian giants. They were being outcompeted by their own closer relatives, by other mammals that were simply better adapted to Mesozoic conditions. This has a profound implication for our story. In the timeline where the asteroid missed, the playing field wouldn't simply have cleared for the ancestors of modern mammals. The multituberculates, which in our timeline survived the extinction and persisted for another 30 million years before finally dying out, would have kept competing with the ancestors of rodents. The gondwanatheres would have continued occupying the niches that marsupials might otherwise have filled in the southern hemisphere. The mammals wouldn't have escaped their ecological cage. They would have remained exactly what they'd been for the previous 150 million years. Small, nocturnal, successful in a very limited way, and completely dominated by the reptilian giants who had earned the planet fair and square. That context established, let's go forward. The open loop we're holding out for you. The question of whether, given enough time, 66 million years of uninterrupted evolution, the dinosaurs could have produced something like us, something that thinks, something that wonders. We'll get there, but not yet. First, we have to understand what the world would have done to them. Because the asteroid was just the first test. And in our timeline, it was the last one they had to pass. In the alternate timeline, the real tests were still coming. There is another layer to the 60-second window story that deserves careful attention, because it speaks to something profound about the nature of contingency itself. The Chicxulub impactor did not simply appear in Earth's vicinity and fly straight in. Its trajectory was the product of billions of years of gravitational interactions, the slow orbital perturbations caused by Jupiter's enormous gravity, the gentle nudges from Saturn, the interactions with other asteroids in the belt, the solar wind pushing against its surface over geological time. Change any one of these interactions at any point in the preceding 4 billion years, and the impactor arrives at a different angle, at a slightly different time and strikes a different place. The impactor almost certainly passed through Earth's orbital path many times before the fatal encounter. Mathematical models suggest it may have made dozens of close approaches over millions of years before the specific orbital mechanics aligned to produce the collision. In every previous approach, it missed. In every previous approach, the dinosaurs lived on, completely unaware that a mountain was periodically checking whether today was the day. What finally made it hit? The details are, in the most literal sense, incalculable. Too many variables over too many years to resolve with certainty. This is not a failure of scientific understanding. It is the mathematical reality of chaotic dynamical systems. Small perturbations compound exponentially. The history of the solar system is written in chaos. The history of life on Earth is written in the outcomes of that chaos. We are the beneficiaries of one particular outcome. The alternate timeline we've been exploring is the beneficiary of a different one. Neither was inevitable. Neither was unlikely in the grand scheme of planetary formation and asteroid orbital dynamics. They were simply two branches in a probability tree with an astronomical number of branches, and the universe happened to follow this one. Now, let's establish what the world was like on the morning after the near miss, the full ecological inventory of what the dinosaurs were inheriting, because we need to understand the starting position before we can calculate the trajectory. The Hell Creek ecosystem we've been describing represents only one corner of a world of extraordinary diversity. In Asia, the Nemegt Formation preserves a similarly rich fauna, Tarbosaurus, the tyrannosaur relative, alongside enormous titanosaur sauropods and the bizarre oviraptorid Gigantoraptor, the largest known oviraptorosaurian, which at roughly 8 meters long and potentially 2,000 kilograms would have been the most improbable bird you've never seen. In South America, the titanosaur sauropods had evolved to sizes that make even Tyrannosaurus seem modest. Patagotitan majorum, reconstructed from fossils discovered in 2017, may have weighed up to 70 tons, roughly equivalent to 10 bull African elephants. 70 tons. A single animal. Walking on 4 legs. Breathing with a lung system so efficient it could extract oxygen from air at thin altitudes that would have left mammals gasping. This is the diversity we're talking about. This is the foundation on which 66 million years of additional evolution would have been built. In Europe, the Cretaceous was already producing something interesting: island faunas. Much of what is now continental Europe was then an archipelago of tropical islands scattered across a shallow sea. And these islands were doing what islands always do, producing miniature versions of their mainland relatives through the island dwarfing effect, and occasionally giant versions of smaller animals through island gigantism. Haitej Island, in what is now Romania, hosted dwarf sauropods the size of horses alongside normal-sized pterosaurs, an ecosystem running at a different scale from anything on the mainland, already demonstrating that the dinosaur body plan was far more flexible than we tend to assume. Africa, surprisingly, is one of the most mysterious continents for late Cretaceous paleontology. The fossil record is sparse there. We have isolated finds from Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, but nothing like the dense accumulations in North America or Central Asia. What we know suggests a fauna dominated by abelosaurid theropods, stocky, small-armed predators quite different from the tyrannosaurs of the north, alongside titanosaur sauropods and, possibly, other herbivore groups we haven't yet found. This geographic variation is crucial for understanding the alternate history. The world in our divergent timeline doesn't just contain dinosaurs. It contains regionally distinct assemblages of dinosaurs, already differentiated by tens of millions of years of evolution in isolation, already beginning the long process of continental exchange and competition that would have accelerated as Gondwana continued to fragment and the continents drifted into new configurations. The stage is set, the characters are in place, the curtain is rising on 66 million years of a play that was never performed. 10 million years after the asteroid missed. Stand on a hilltop in what will one day be called North America and look out across the landscape. The continents haven't moved much. Continental drift operates at centimeters per year, and 10 million years isn't enough to rearrange geography in any dramatic way. The forests still stretch from pole to pole. The temperature is still warm, still humid, still tropical at high latitudes, but the plants are different. The flowering plants, angiosperms, had been spreading throughout the Cretaceous, diversifying and competing with the older conifers and ferns that had dominated Mesozoic forests. Without the catastrophic disruption of the extinction event, this process continued. By 10 million years post-divergence, the angiosperms have conquered most of the world's forests, and many of them are bearing fruit. Fruit is one of evolution's great inventions, a bribe offered by plants to animals. Eat this sweet, nutritious flesh. Carry my seeds somewhere else in your gut. Deposit them far from the parent plant with a convenient pile of fertilizer. It's a strategy that works spectacularly well, which is why it evolved independently in so many plant lineages. In our timeline, the explosion of fruit-bearing plants in the early Cenozoic helped drive the evolution of fruit-eating mammals, eventually the primates who gave rise to us. In our alternate timeline, the same ecological opportunity exists. The difference is which animals are best positioned to exploit it, not mammals. Dinosaurs. Specifically, the Maniraptoran theropods. Maniraptorans are the lineage that includes Dromaeosaurids, Troodontids, Oviraptorosaurs, and the direct ancestors of modern birds. By the late Cretaceous, they already show a remarkable suite of adaptations that, in the new angiosperm-dominated world, become positively prescient. Grasping hands capable of manipulating objects. Many of them have forward-facing eyes providing genuine binocular vision, useful for judging distances when reaching for food or leaping between branches. They're small enough to climb, light enough to venture onto branches that would snap under anything heavier. Some of them, the Oviraptorosaurs in particular, have already evolved toothless beaks potentially suited for processing fruit and seeds. Picture a descendant of these animals 10 million years into our alternate timeline. It's small, the size of a modern howler monkey, covered in a coat of vivid display feathers. Its hands retain the three-clawed fingers of its theropod ancestors, but they've grown more dexterous, more capable of fine manipulation. Its beak has developed a slight hook at the tip, useful for tearing open thick-skinned fruits. It lives in the canopy of the new flowering forests, leaping from branch to branch with the confidence of an animal that has been doing this in one form or another for 170 million years. This is speculation, but it's grounded in real evolutionary trends. The ecological opportunity was genuine. The pre-adaptations were genuine. What is not genuine is the story that fruit-bearing forests were waiting specifically for the primates. They were waiting for whoever got there first. And in a world without the extinction, the Maniraptorans got there first. Now, around 55 million years ago, roughly 11 million years after the divergence point, the world lurched into something extraordinary. Scientists call it the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, the PETM. Within perhaps 20,000 years, a geological eye blink, global temperatures spiked by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius above an already warm baseline. The polar regions, already warm by modern standards, became genuinely tropical. Palm trees grew in Alaska. Crocodilians basked on the shores of the Arctic Ocean. The deep oceans warmed by several degrees, fundamentally altering marine circulation patterns. The cause was almost certainly a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere, possibly from volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic, possibly from the destabilization of methane hydrates on the ocean floor, possibly from some combination of both. The result was the most intense greenhouse effect Earth had experienced in tens of millions of years. In our timeline, the PETM reshaped mammalian evolution dramatically. Species went extinct. Others shrank in size because smaller bodies are easier to cool. New lineages appeared, adapted to hothouse conditions. The primates that would eventually give rise to monkeys and apes first appear in the fossil record right around this time. In our alternate timeline, the PETM hits a world still owned by dinosaurs. Here's the thing about that. Dinosaurs might have handled it better. Mammals are endotherms. They generate their own body heat internally and maintain a constant internal temperature, usually around 37 degrees Celsius. This is metabolically expensive and requires sophisticated cooling, sweating, panting, seeking shade, restricting activity to cooler parts of the day. When ambient temperatures approach or exceed body temperature, these mechanisms become less effective. A mammal in extreme heat is working against thermodynamics, trying to dump heat into an environment that doesn't want to accept it. Large dinosaurs operated differently. They were almost certainly gigantotherms. Their sheer mass meant their body temperature changed slowly, regardless of external conditions, like a massive tank of water that takes hours to warm up or cool down. They didn't need to generate as much metabolic heat as mammals because they could absorb warmth from their environment during the day and retain it through the night. Because they didn't maintain the high constant temperatures mammals require, they weren't as vulnerable to overheating when the world got hot. The smaller dinosaurs had their own advantages. Many of them were feathered, and feathers are remarkably versatile thermal management tools. They can be fluffed up to trap warm air in cold conditions, or sleeked down and spread to allow heat dissipation in hot conditions. The same structure that would later help dinosaurs survive polar winters might have helped them ride out equatorial summers during the PETM. The tropical regions during the Eocene hothouse might have become challenging even for dinosaurs, perhaps forcing seasonal migrations toward the poles, perhaps creating equatorial dead zones where even the most heat-tolerant animals struggled. But the poles themselves would have become paradise, warm, wet, covered in lush forests extending nearly to the Arctic and Antarctic circles. Perfect habitat for dinosaurs of every size, expanding into regions that had previously been marginal. But the land wasn't the only arena where evolution was at work. In the oceans, something remarkable was happening, something that would have permanently changed the nature of Earth's seas. In our timeline, the great Mesozoic marine reptiles went extinct at the KPG boundary. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, creatures that had dominated the world's oceans for tens and hundreds of millions of years, vanished alongside the land dinosaurs. The ecological niches they left behind were vast and empty, and over the course of the Eocene, they were filled by whales, land-dwelling mammals that made one of evolution's great U-turns and returned to the sea. In our alternate timeline, the marine reptiles never went extinct. The mosasaurs of the late Cretaceous were at their absolute peak. Massive sea lizards, some reaching 15 meters in length, with powerful jaws and paddle-like limbs. They were the apex predators of the shallow seas, filling roles similar to modern orcas and great white sharks. The PETM, with its warmer and more productive oceans, would have been an explosion of opportunity for them. Some lineages might have grown larger still, exploiting the abundant marine life of the hothouse seas. Others might have become more streamlined, faster, better adapted to hunting in the open ocean. The plesiosaurs, those long-necked marine reptiles that had persisted for over 135 million years before the asteroid ended them in our timeline, would have continued their own evolutionary journey. Their body plan seems almost absurdly impractical to modern eyes. 4 large flippers, and a neck that could be longer than the rest of the body combined. Yet it worked well enough to sustain them through the Jurassic and Cretaceous. In the warming Eocene oceans, perhaps some plesiosaur lineages would have evolved their long necks into ambush weapons, striking at schools of fish from unexpected angles. Perhaps others would have become filter feeders, straining plankton from the warming surface waters the way baleen whales do today. The point is that the oceans of our alternate timeline would have looked fundamentally different. Instead of whales and dolphins, the seas would have hosted the continued diversification of lineages that had been marine for hundreds of millions of years. The ecological niches would have been similar, but the animals filling them would have been unrecognizably different. And in the skies above those hothouse seas, the pterosaurs would have been thriving. In our timeline, the pterosaurs went extinct alongside the dinosaurs, but in our alternate history, they would have persisted through the PETM, and the warm, productive Eocene seas would have been ideal habitat. Picture colonies of pterosaurs nesting on sea cliffs, filling the ecological roles that seabirds occupy today. Picture a Quetzalcoatlus descendant, wingspan still approaching 12 meters, soaring on thermals above tropical coastlines, plucking fish from the surface with a beak the length of a human arm, its hollow bones making the whole operation inexplicably elegant. The skies of the Eocene would have been shared between pterosaurs and birds, both technically dinosaur lineages, but so different in form and history that they would have competed for some niches while dividing others, a complex aerial ecology that has no parallel in the world we know. Around 50 million years ago, in our alternate timeline, the dinosaurs would have reached a kind of equilibrium with the hothouse world. Diversified across every continent, dominant in nearly every terrestrial and aerial niche, their marine reptile cousins filling the seas. It might have seemed to an observer at that moment that this was simply how the world worked. That dinosaurs were as permanent a feature of Earth as mountains and oceans. But the climate doesn't stay constant forever. Even as the dinosaurs were flourishing in their hothouse Eden, the processes that would eventually end it were already underway. India was crashing into Asia, raising the Himalayas, and the weathering of those new mountains would begin drawing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Antarctica was drifting toward the South Pole, and soon an ocean current would isolate it from the warmth of the tropics. The long cooling was coming, and it would transform the Earth more profoundly than any asteroid ever could. Let's spend some time underwater, because the story of the alternate oceans is one of the most alien aspects of the world we're constructing, and one of the most consequential for understanding why that world would have no human beings in it. In our timeline, the whales are the ocean's great success story. Over roughly 15 million years of the Eocene epoch, the ancestors of modern whales, small, four-legged land mammals called pachycetids, made one of evolution's most extraordinary transformations. They entered the water, they lost their legs, they developed echolocation, they grew. Some of them grew into the largest animals that have ever lived on this planet. The blue whale, at up to 30 meters and 190 metric tons, may be the biggest creature Earth has ever produced. In our alternate timeline, none of that happens. Not because the whale lineage goes extinct. It might still exist in some diminished form as small semi-aquatic mammals haunting river deltas and coastal shallows. But the great oceanic niches it evolved to fill are already occupied. And they are occupied by things that have been evolving for the better part of 200 million years. The mosasaurs are the key to understanding the alternate ocean. By the time the asteroid missed, mosasaurs had already been the dominant large predators of marine ecosystems for 20 million years. They came in an astonishing variety of forms, from streamlined open ocean hunters the size of killer whales to massive ambush predators lurking in shallow coastal waters. They had flippers instead of legs. They breathed air. They were, in many ways, already functionally analogous to modern marine mammals. But they were reptiles, with all the physiological advantages that entailed. Here's something important about mosasaurs that most people don't know. They were not primitive sea lizards lumbering through the water. They were sophisticated, high-performance predators with physiological adaptations that rivaled anything the Cenozoic mammals would later develop. Their tails were vertically oriented, like a shark's, providing efficient thrust. Their jaws were double-hinged, capable of swallowing prey considerably larger than their head size would suggest. Some species may have been endothermic, warm-blooded, or at least capable of regional endothermy, keeping their swimming muscles warm for sustained high-speed pursuit. 66 million years of additional evolution in warm Eocene oceans rich with prey would have done extraordinary things with these animals. Picture the mosasaur lineage 50 million years into the alternate timeline. The ancestral body plan: long, streamlined, flippers fore and aft, a powerful tail, has been refined to an extraordinary degree. Some lineages have grown enormous. The prey fish of the Eocene and Oligocene oceans are large and fast, and catching them requires speed and stamina. Natural selection would ruthlessly favor individuals that could sustain high-speed pursuit over long distances. The result might look something like a sleeker, more hydrodynamic version of the original mosasaur body plan. Thicker insulating fat layers, more deeply forked tail flukes, a longer body to house the muscles needed for sustained swimming. Not a whale, because the developmental pathway to the mosasaur body plan is different from the pathway to a whale, but filling a similar ecological role. Hunting the same prey, swimming the same seas, the plesiosaurs present a different, and in some ways, more intriguing case. Their body plan: 4 massive flippers, a relatively rigid body, that extraordinarily long neck, was ancient even by Cretaceous standards. They'd been around since the Triassic. And yet, in our timeline, they were spectacularly successful, right up until the moment the asteroid hit. That long neck is the key to understanding what the plesiosaurs might have become, with another 66 million years to work with. In the fossil record, we see hints that the neck was already beginning to serve multiple functions. In some lineages, it had grown so long that it must have been used as an ambush weapon, sweeping through schools of fish with a rapid lateral strike, or rearing up to strike downward like a heron. Other lineages show shortened necks and larger heads, suggesting a shift toward a more direct hunting style. The plesiosaur body plan was already diversifying when the asteroid hit. Given more time, the divergence might have become spectacular. Some lineages might have developed truly enormous necks, longer than their entire body, that functioned as high-precision fish-catching tools, capable of plunging deep into dense schools with minimal resistance. Others might have gone the opposite direction, becoming massive open-ocean hunters with short, powerful necks and jaws that could take on prey the size of modern great white sharks. And some, this is the genuinely strange possibility, might have become filter feeders. The Eocene and Oligocene oceans were extraordinarily productive by modern standards, with blooms of plankton and small fish so dense that a suitably equipped large animal could sustain itself by simply swimming through them with its mouth open. In our timeline, this niche was filled first by large sharks, and then, more successfully, by baleen whales. In the alternate timeline, a plesiosaur lineage that evolved a filtering mechanism, perhaps a modified version of their existing tooth structure, perhaps a wholly new gill raker apparatus, might have beaten both of them to it. Picture a Miocene ocean in our alternate timeline, roughly 20 million years post-divergence. The surface of a deep-water basin in what we would recognize as the North Atlantic. A massive silhouette moves just below the surface, 30 meters long, its 4 enormous flippers sweeping slowly back and forth in a pattern that looks almost like wings. Its neck is short and massive. Its jaws hang open as it cruises through a dense krill bloom, straining tons of the tiny crustaceans from the water in a single, slow pass. Above it, on the surface, smaller mosasaur descendants splash and hunt. Below it, deep in the thermocline, other things are moving. descendants of the great deep-diving plesiosaurs of the Cretaceous, adapted over millions of years for the pressures and darkness of the deep, scattering layer. And here is the question that should stop you cold. Would any of this have left room for human beings? The answer is almost certainly no. Not because the marine reptiles would have directly prevented human evolution. They operate in a completely different ecosystem. But because the absence of the great whale radiation in our alternate timeline would have cascading effects on the oceans that would ultimately affect everything connected to them. In our timeline, whales are not just animals. They are ecosystem engineers. Their feeding and defecation patterns create what oceanographers call the whale pump, a vertical circulation of nutrients from the deep ocean to the surface that dramatically increases the productivity of surface waters. The great whale populations of the Miocene and Pliocene, before human hunting decimated them, may have been responsible for a significant fraction of the ocean's total biological productivity. In our alternate timeline, the marine reptiles might have performed a similar engineering function, but differently. Their physiology, their feeding patterns, their migration routes, their reproductive strategies would all have been different from whales. The ocean chemistry would have been different. The atmospheric chemistry would have been slightly different. The climate would have been slightly different. Every slightly different climate is a different selection pressure on every living species. After 66 million years of slightly different selection pressures applied to every species on every continent and every ocean, the world would have been comprehensively unrecognizable. And in a comprehensively unrecognizable world, there is no particular reason to expect that the specific sequence of events that produced Homo sapiens would have occurred. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're still in the Eocene. The cooling hasn't begun yet. And on land, something important is happening in the forests. The mammals are still there. They are still small. They are still nocturnal. But they are adapting to a world that will never give them the opportunity to be anything else. And in doing so, they are evolving in directions that would astonish anyone who knows only the mammals of our timeline. The night belongs to them. The underground belongs to them. The high canopy of the tropical forests, too thin for large dinosaurs to reach, belongs to them. These are not trivial ecological zones. In a world covered pole to pole with forest, the underground alone represents an enormous volume of living space. An entire parallel ecosystem might exist beneath the feet of the dinosaurs. Networks of tunnels and chambers occupied by mammal species that rarely or never venture to the surface, their eyes reduced or absent, their hearing extraordinary, their whiskers capable of detecting vibrations through solid earth. They would be invisible to the world above them. A hidden dynasty, thriving in all the spaces the reptilian rulers overlooked. In the canopy, something more interesting might be happening. Small arboreal mammals, in a world with no ground-level release valve for their lineage, might have been driven toward greater and greater specialization for three-dimensional movement in trees. Grasping feet. Forward-facing eyes for depth perception in a three-dimensional maze. Complex social structures, because cooperation matters when you live in a fragmented, patchy canopy environment. Could intelligence have evolved in these creatures? It's possible. The pressures that drive cognitive evolution, the need to navigate complex environments, to track multiple social relationships, to remember the locations of scattered resources, were all present. But the specific sequence of events that produced human intelligence required our ancestors to descend from the trees onto an open savanna where the rules were completely different. That descent would never happen in a world where the savannas were patrolled by large, fast, alert theropods. The mammals would have become very good at being small. They would have become very good at hiding. They would have developed remarkable sensory systems, complex social structures, possibly even modest tool use, but they would not have become us. The ocean's deep trenches and the forest's hidden understory, those would have been their world. The surface, the sky, the open ground, those would have remained forever the domain of the dinosaurs. The real question is what those dinosaurs became next. Because in roughly 34 million years, about 32 million years after the asteroid missed, the world was about to change in a way that had nothing to do with rocks from space. Around 34 million years ago, the Earth began a long, slow slide toward colder conditions that would eventually culminate in the ice ages of the Pleistocene. The immediate trigger was Antarctica. For millions of years, the southern continent had been connected to South America by a narrow land bridge, and warm ocean currents from the tropics had been able to reach its shores, keeping it surprisingly mild despite its polar position. But as the continents drifted apart, a new ocean current formed, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, that isolated Antarctica from the warmth of the rest of the world. Ice sheets began forming on the continent for the first time in hundreds of millions of years. The planetary thermostat had been turned down, and it would never fully recover. The effects rippled outward from the poles. Global temperatures dropped by several degrees. Sea levels fell as water locked into Antarctic ice. Rainfall patterns shifted as the temperature gradients between equator and poles steepened, and the forests, those endless pole-to-pole forests that had characterized the age of dinosaurs, began to retreat. Trees require certain minimum temperatures and rainfall amounts to thrive, and as those conditions retreated toward the equator, the forests retreated with them. In their place, something new was appearing. Open landscapes, woodlands with gaps between the trees, clearings where sunlight reached the ground. And then, around 23 million years ago, in the early Miocene, grass began its conquest. Grass doesn't seem like a revolutionary organism. It's humble, low to the ground, easily overlooked. But grass has a superpower that no plant before it possessed to the same degree. It grows from its base, not its tip. You can cut it, burn it, graze it to stubble, and it simply grows back. This makes it essentially impossible to destroy through browsing or fire. It's the plant equivalent of a hydra. Remove its head, and two more grow in its place. Grass also produces silica phytoliths, microscopic particles of glass embedded in its tissues. These make grass genuinely abrasive, wearing down teeth with every bite. Any animal that tries to eat grass as a primary food source is essentially eating sandpaper. Over millions of years, this drove the evolution of hypsodont teeth in our timeline, the high-crowned, continuously growing teeth that characterize horses, cattle, and other grazing mammals. Animals that couldn't evolve solutions to the grass problem were simply locked out of the grassland ecosystem. By roughly 20 million years ago, in our alternate timeline, grasslands have spread across the continental interiors of every major landmass. The endless forests are retreating. A new world is emerging, open, vast, sun-drenched, and full of opportunities for any animal adaptable enough to exploit it. The dinosaurs that step into this new world are not the same dinosaurs that walked the Cretaceous forests. They've had 46 million years of evolution since the asteroid missed. They've already been through the Eocene hothouse and the Oligocene cooling. They've already adapted to a world gradually becoming cooler, drier, more seasonal. But the grasslands are a fundamentally different challenge, and the way the dinosaurs meet it tells us something important about the engines of evolution. Consider the ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs that dominated the herbivore niches of Cretaceous North America. In the Cretaceous forests, they were browsers, using their parrot-like beaks to crop vegetation and their shearing teeth to process it. But those teeth weren't designed for grass. The silica would have worn them down quickly, leaving the animals unable to feed efficiently. Natural selection, relentless and implacable, would have been ruthless about this. Every ceratopsian that happened to have slightly harder tooth enamel would have survived slightly longer and reproduced slightly more. Every ceratopsian that happened to have teeth that wore down more slowly would have passed that trait onto its offspring. Over millions of years, 10, 20, 30 million years, these tiny incremental advantages would have accumulated into something dramatic. Picture a descendant of Triceratops 20 million years into the Miocene, fully adapted to grassland life. It's still recognizable as a ceratopsian. The basic body plan is too successful to abandon, but the proportions have changed. The head is lower to the ground, adapted for close cropping. The beak is wider and more squared, designed to shear grass in broad swaths like a living lawnmower. The teeth have evolved to grow continuously from below, replacing themselves as they wear against the silica. The same elegant solution that horses stumbled onto independently in our timeline. The frill has shrunk, less elaborate, more functional. Energy better spent on those massive jaw muscles needed to grind tough vegetation all day. And it moves in herds, not dozens, hundreds, thousands. Picture that river of flesh and horn flowing across the Miocene prairie, the ground trembling under thousands of enormous hooves, a sound you could hear from 20 miles away. This is the Cretaceous aesthetic translated into grassland grammar. The biology is different, but the ecology rhymes. Vast herds of armored herbivores sweeping across open land, cropping the grass down and fertilizing it with their dung, reshaping the landscape the way the great bison herds once reshaped the North American plains. The hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, present an interesting competitive case. Their dental batteries were already the most sophisticated plant processing machinery any dinosaur had ever evolved. Rows of hundreds of interlocking teeth, constantly being replaced, capable of handling tough vegetation with efficiency nothing else could match. In some ways, they were pre-adapted for grazing, which might mean they beat the ceratopsians to the grasslands and established dominance before the horned dinosaurs could fully adapt. More likely, the two lineages would have partitioned the grassland ecosystem, the way different ungulate species partition the modern African savanna. The hadrosaurs might have specialized on tall grasses and the nutritional gradient near water sources where vegetation was richer. The ceratopsians might have dominated the dry interior, cropping the sparse, tough grass that nothing else could handle. Each lineage pushing the other toward its particular niche through the competitive dynamics that have shaped ecosystems since the first single-celled organisms competed for the same patch of primordial ocean. The ornithomimosaurs, the ostrich dinosaurs of the Cretaceous, were already pre-adapted for grassland life in other ways. Long legs, light builds. Probably omnivorous, capable of exploiting a variety of food sources. On the open plains, they might have become the ecological equivalents of antelope and gazelles, fast, alert, living in herds, relying on speed to escape predators. Picture a Miocene ornithomimid with legs even longer than its Cretaceous ancestors, neck long enough to see over the tall grass, feeding on a mixture of grass seeds, insects, and small animals. When threatened, reaching speeds of 60 kilometers per hour, fast enough to outrun anything that depends on pure pursuit. But open grasslands don't just create new prey species. They demand new predators. A classic Cretaceous tyrannosaur would have been poorly suited to hunting on open plains. In a forest, a 6-ton predator can hide behind trees, approach within striking distance before prey even knows it's there. On an open plain, there's no hiding a predator that stands 4 meters at the hip. The prey can see you coming from kilometers away. And you, with your massive body and relatively short legs, cannot sustain the high-speed pursuit needed to catch animals that evolved specifically to be fast. But, and this is crucial, evolution doesn't abandon successful body plans. It refines them. The tyrannosaur lineage of the Miocene grasslands would have been leaner. Natural selection would have relentlessly favored individuals that were faster, lighter, more efficient runners. Over 30 million years, the span of time between us and the Oligocene, the stocky body plan of T-Rex would have stretched and thinned. Longer legs relative to body mass. A more horizontal posture for better balance at speed. Perhaps a smaller, lighter head to reduce the weight at the front of the body. The result might have looked something like the earlier, lighter tyrannosaurs, Dilong, Guanlong, scaled up and further refined. But even a slimmed-down tyrannosaur would have faced a fundamental problem. The largest prey animals would have been herd animals, and hunting herd animals alone is dangerous and inefficient. A lone wolf can't bring down a healthy bison. A lone lion can't take a full-grown buffalo. The solution, discovered independently by wolves and lions and African wild dogs in our timeline, is cooperative hunting, working together in coordinated groups to isolate, exhaust, and overwhelm prey that no individual could take alone. In our alternate timeline, the selective pressure for this would have been enormous. Individuals that could cooperate would have eaten. Individuals that couldn't would have starved. Over millions of years, that pressure is enough to reshape behavior, to build brains capable of coordination and communication, to create social structures that never existed before. Picture a pack of Miocene tyrannosaurs, 6 or 8 individuals, moving across the open grassland in the early morning light. They're smaller than their Cretaceous ancestors, maybe 7 meters long instead of 12, 3 tons instead of 6. But they're faster, more agile, and they work together. They've spotted a herd of grazing ceratopsians in the distance. Now they're spreading out, some circling wide to cut off escape routes, others approaching more directly to drive the herd toward the ambush. When they attack, it's a coordinated strike from multiple angles, each individual knowing its role, working together with precision that T-Rex never needed. The age of the lone apex predator is ending. The age of the pack hunter is beginning. And in the age of the pack hunter, something else is beginning too. Something that will define the next 20 million years of the alternate timeline. Intelligence. In 1982, a Canadian paleontologist named Dale Russell published a thought experiment that became one of the most famous and most controversial pieces of speculative paleontology ever written. Russell had been studying Troodon, a small theropod dinosaur from the late Cretaceous, perhaps 2 meters long, known primarily for something unusual: its brain. Specifically, the size of its brain relative to its body. The encephalization quotient, a measure of brain size corrected for body size, of Troodon was higher than that of any other known dinosaur. Higher, in some estimates, than that of many modern non-primate mammals. Russell asked a simple question: what if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct? What might Troodon's descendants have become after 66 million additional years of evolution? His answer was the dinosauroid, a hypothetical creature that stood upright on 2 legs, had manipulative hands with opposable digits, and possessed a large, rounded brain case capable of housing human-level intelligence. Russell even commissioned a sculpture of his creation. The result was strikingly humanoid. Forward-facing eyes, vertical posture, a body that looked more like a gray alien than a dinosaur. The implications were obvious, and they captured the public imagination immediately. Given enough time, dinosaurs might have become intelligent. We might have had competition. The scientific community was more skeptical. The criticism that followed, and has only intensified in the decades since, targets not the idea that dinosaurs might have become more intelligent, but the assumption embedded in Russell's model, that intelligence inevitably leads to a humanoid body plan. Russell's logic went like this: intelligence requires a large brain. A large brain requires an upright posture to balance it on the spine. An upright posture frees the forelimbs from locomotion. Free forelimbs naturally evolve into manipulative hands. Therefore, any sufficiently intelligent creature will eventually look more or less like a human. This logic is seductive. It is also almost certainly wrong. Consider the most cognitively sophisticated non-human animals alive today. Crows and ravens have demonstrated problem-solving abilities that rival great apes. They use tools, solve multi-step puzzles, recognize themselves in mirrors, appear to understand concepts like cause and effect and fairness. They do all of this with wings instead of hands, with a brain the size of a walnut, in a body plan that has remained fundamentally unchanged for tens of millions of years. Their intelligence evolved within the constraints of a very non-humanoid anatomy, and those constraints didn't stop them from becoming astonishingly smart. New Caledonian crows manufacture hook-shaped tools from materials they've never encountered before. solving problems in a single attempt that human children can't manage until age 5. They cache food and protect it from theft by other crows who they know are watching. Theory of mind: the ability to model another creature's knowledge and intentions, expressed in an animal whose entire brain is lighter than a golf ball. Or consider octopuses: problem solving, tool use, individual personalities. A nervous system with neurons distributed throughout 8 separate arms, each capable of semi-independent operation. An octopus is as far from a humanoid body plan as you can get, and they are arguably more cognitively sophisticated than most vertebrates. Intelligence is not a destination that evolution was always trying to reach. It's a tool, like claws or wings or venom, that evolves when the selective pressures favor it and can evolve in bodies of almost any shape. So what would genuinely intelligent dinosaurs actually look like? Probably like dinosaurs. The Troodontid brain was already unusually large, but the Troodontid body plan was perfectly functional. Bipedal locomotion on strong hind limbs. A horizontal posture balanced by a long tail, grasping forelimbs with 3 clawed fingers, a head full of sharp teeth and a sleek, aerodynamic skull. This was a body plan that worked. Evolution modifies working body plans. It doesn't scrap them and start over just because the brain is getting bigger. What would have driven that brain to get bigger? The grasslands. Specifically, cooperative hunting on the grasslands. We already established that the Miocene grasslands created strong selective pressure for pack hunting in large theropods. But the same pressures applied, with even greater intensity, to the smaller predators. Cooperative hunting requires coordination. Coordination requires communication. Communication requires the cognitive apparatus to encode and transmit complex information. Information that could be transmitted might include prey location, prey behavior, the positions of pack members, the success or failure of previous hunting strategies, the existence of threats, the social status of individuals, the history of past interactions. Every step up that ladder of cognitive sophistication, every additional bit of information that could be reliably transmitted and acted upon, would have provided a survival advantage. Individuals that could communicate a flanking maneuver would have eaten better than individuals that couldn't. Individuals that could remember that a particular prey animal had a broken leg and was vulnerable from the left side would have had higher hunting success than individuals that couldn't. Individuals that could recognize and recall dozens of their pack members' faces, voices, and behavioral histories would have been better at navigating the complex social politics that determine breeding access in a large group. This is a cognitive feedback loop. More intelligence enables better cooperation. Better cooperation enables access to larger prey. Access to larger prey provides more energy for growing bigger brains. Bigger brains enable more intelligence. It's the same feedback loop that drove the explosive expansion of the human brain over the past 3 million years, just operating on a different lineage, in a different geological epoch, on a different branch of the family tree. By 10 million years ago, in our alternate timeline, 56 million years after the divergence point, the Troodontid descendants would have been remarkable creatures. Picture 1, roughly 2 meters long from snout to tail tip, covered in feathers ranging from cryptic gray on the back to near white on the belly. optimal camouflage for the open grasslands where it hunts. Eyes large and forward-facing, providing excellent binocular vision. Three-fingered hands capable of grasping and manipulating objects with precision its Cretaceous ancestors couldn't approach. And a skull that bulges noticeably at the back, housing a brain proportionally larger than that of any land animal on Earth. How intelligent! Comparative neurobiology gives us a rough yardstick. Modern birds, the only surviving dinosaur lineage, have developed remarkable cognitive abilities in 66 million years of evolution. Crows and parrots have brain-to-body ratios comparable to great apes. Starting with Troodontid's already impressive encephalization quotient and adding another 66 million years of selection pressure that specifically favors cognitive ability, communication, cooperation, problem-solving, social navigation, the Troodontid descendants might plausibly have reached something in the range of dolphin or chimpanzee-level intelligence. That's not nothing. That's extraordinary. It's sophisticated tool use, complex communication, multi-generational knowledge transfer, something that might be described as culture. A Troodontid of the late Miocene would have been terrifyingly smart by any standard that isn't specifically the standard of industrial age humanity. It would have used simple tools, sticks to probe burrows for hidden prey, rocks to crack open hard-shelled food items, perhaps rudimentary structures to shelter young from predators or weather. It would have had a complex vocal repertoire, dozens of distinct calls communicating information about predator species, distance, direction, prey type, prey behavior, and social information about pack members. Young Troodontids would have learned through extended apprenticeship to their parents and older pack members, watching and imitating before being allowed to participate in complex hunts. The knowledge would have been genuinely cultural. Things you learned, not things you were born knowing, capable of accumulating over generations as successful strategies were observed, adopted, and passed on. But would it have built cities? No. Would it have developed writing, mathematics, philosophy, science? No. Why not? Because human-level technological intelligence isn't just about having a big brain. It's about a very specific set of circumstances that, as far as we can tell, occurred exactly once in the history of life on Earth. Our ancestors were primates, a lineage that had already spent tens of millions of years developing complex social structures, manipulative hands fine-tuned for branch-gripping precision, and brains adapted for navigating three-dimensional arboreal environments. Then climate change forced them onto an open savanna where they faced a perfect storm of selection pressures, the need to find food across large territories, the need to cooperate in groups large enough to be physically dangerous, the need to communicate increasingly complex information about abstract concepts. Not just predator there, but yesterday I saw predator tracks going toward water. Our brains expanded dramatically over just a few million years, driven by a feedback loop between social complexity and cognitive ability that reached an almost vertical inflection point somewhere between 2 million and 200,000 years ago. This specific sequence of events was contingent on factors that simply don't exist in our alternate timeline. Primates, if they exist at all in our alternate world, have remained small arboreal creatures, never forced onto the savanna, never experiencing the selection pressures that drove the hominid explosion. The savanna would belong to dinosaurs, fast, alert, socially sophisticated dinosaurs that leave no open ecological space for a slow, relatively physically weak ape to develop compensatory cognitive abilities. The Troodontids could have produced creatures that think, that cooperate, that learn, that make tools, that communicate complex information, that grieve for their dead and protect their young with something that looks, from the outside, like love. But they would not have produced creatures that wonder why they exist, that model reality mathematically, that send machines to other planets. They would have remained animals, brilliant animals, the most cognitively sophisticated animals this planet would have ever hosted. But animals, living in a world that did not know it could be known. And maybe there's something beautiful in that. A world of pure experience without the burden of consciousness, where a creature can hunt and cooperate and communicate and remember without ever asking itself what the point is. Where intelligence exists as a tool, not a mirror. Where no one lies awake at 3 in the morning wondering whether it was all worth it. The grasslands would have been their Serengeti. The packs would have been their civilization. The deep geological time stretching out ahead of them would have been their eternity, unmarked by any creature capable of recording its passage. But the eternity was about to get cold. The question of intelligence in our alternate timeline is actually 2 separate questions that often get conflated, and separating them is essential for thinking clearly about what the Troodontid descendants might have become. The first question is whether any dinosaur lineage would have evolved what we might call functional intelligence, the ability to solve novel problems, learn from experience, communicate complex information, and pass learned knowledge across generations. This is the question Dale Russell was really asking about the dinosauroid, though he framed it in humanoid terms. The answer is almost certainly yes, and we don't need to speculate wildly to get there. We've already seen it happen. The birds, the one dinosaur lineage that actually survived, have demonstrated that the dinosaur nervous system is capable of supporting remarkable cognitive sophistication. New Caledonian crows have been observed in the wild making tools from materials they have never encountered before, solving multi-step problems and teaching these techniques to their offspring. The cognitive test that Clark's nutcrackers perform, caching up to 30,000 seeds across hundreds of square kilometers and retrieving the vast majority of them months later, would be impressive in a human, let alone in an animal with a brain the size of a walnut. The corvids and parrots have achieved this level of cognition in 66 million years of avian evolution, starting from ancestral bird species that were probably somewhere in the cognitive range of a modern chicken. Starting from Troodon, which was already cognitively well above that baseline, and applying 66 million years of selection pressure that specifically rewards cognitive ability, the Troodontid descendants would almost certainly have reached and likely exceeded the corvid D parrot level. That's the first question answered. The second question is whether any lineage would have evolved technological intelligence, the specific kind of recursive, abstract, symbol-using consciousness that produces language, mathematics, and eventually industrial civilization. And this is where the answer becomes genuinely uncertain, and where the comparison with bird cognition fails to provide guidance. Human technological intelligence is not simply more of what crows and dolphins have. It's qualitatively different in at least one crucial respect. We can model abstract systems that have no referent in physical reality. We can reason about numbers that don't represent any particular collection of objects. We can construct logical systems. We can think about the rules of thinking itself. This recursive second-order cognition is the foundation on which mathematics is built, and mathematics is the foundation on which science is built, and science is the foundation on which technology is built. Whether this specific cognitive capacity was waiting to emerge in any sufficiently evolved brain, or whether it required the specific concatenation of circumstances that produced it in humans, is one of the genuinely open questions in cognitive science. We have only one example of it. That's not enough data to determine whether it's a likely outcome of evolution or a radical singularity. What we can say is that the pathway to human-level technological intelligence ran through a very specific set of environmental and social circumstances. Our ancestors were forced from the trees onto an open savanna where they were physically outmatched by almost everything they shared the landscape with. This pressure drove the development of compensatory strategies, tools, fire, cooperation in large groups, language for coordinating those groups. The feedback loops between these adaptations drove brain expansion at a rate that has no precedent in the fossil record. In our alternate timeline, no dinosaur would have been forced into that specific predicament. The Troodontids would have been physically capable predators, well-equipped to survive on the open grasslands without the kind of radical compensatory evolution that human ancestors required. Their intelligence would have improved steadily over millions of years, but the specific pressure that drove the late Pleistocene explosion of human cognitive capacity, a small, weak, slow-running ape that had to be extraordinarily smart or die, would never have applied to a 2-meter predator with strong legs, sharp claws, and a lifetime of cooperative hunting experience. This is not a limitation of the dinosaurs. It's a reflection of their success. They were too well adapted to need the kind of cognitive shortcuts that evolution invented for us. But here is the genuinely strange possibility that we haven't yet considered. What if the Troodontid lineage developed something that wasn't intelligence as we define it, but that produced some of the same outcomes? Consider the honeybee. No one would describe a honeybee as intelligent. Its brain has roughly 1 million neurons, compared to our 100 billion. And yet, a honeybee colony can solve optimization problems that challenge human mathematicians. The collective behavior of the hive produces outcomes that a single bee with 100 billion neuron brain couldn't achieve alone. The intelligence, such as it is distributed. It exists in the interaction between individuals rather than within any individual. The Troodontid packs of the late Miocene and Pleistocene would have been highly complex social units, with individual members playing specialized roles, with communication systems encoding detailed tactical information, with multi-year apprenticeship structures for young hunters. Over millions of years of this kind of social complexity, something interesting might have emerged. Not individual intelligence of the human variety, but something like collective problem-solving capacity that exceeded what any individual was capable of. A pack of Pleistocene Troodontid descendants might have been able to coordinate behavior in response to novel situations, new prey species, new environmental challenges, new competitive threats, in ways that looked, from the outside, almost like reasoned decision-making. Not because any individual was reasoning, but because the pack's communication systems were sophisticated enough to aggregate information from many individuals and produce coordinated responses that no individual could have generated alone. This would not have been civilization. It would not have been language in any form we would recognize. But it might have been the beginning of something, a proto-social intelligence that, given another 100 million years, might have gone somewhere remarkable. We'll never know, because we're here instead. 2.5 million years ago, the Earth crossed a threshold. The long cooling that had begun in the Oligocene, that had transformed tropical forests into temperate woodlands and woodlands into grasslands, finally reached its logical extreme. Ice sheets formed in the northern hemisphere, not just on isolated mountain peaks, but spreading across entire continents, burying Scandinavia and Canada under kilometers of frozen water. The Pleistocene had begun, and with it came a climate regime unlike anything the planet had experienced in over 250 million years. The ice didn't advance and stay. It pulsed, advancing during glacial periods lasting roughly 100,000 years, retreating during interglacials lasting 10 to 20,000 years. Over the course of the Pleistocene, more than 20 of these cycles would reshape the planet's geography, pushing ecosystems toward the equator, then allowing them to rebound, creating and destroying land bridges, forcing species to adapt or die. In our timeline, this era produced the iconic megafauna of the Ice Ages: woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave bears, giant ground sloths. In our alternate timeline, it produces something different, something that has never existed before in the history of this planet. Feathered Ice Age giants. Let's address the core question immediately. Could dinosaurs have survived Pleistocene conditions? Temperatures dropping to -40 Celsius in the continental interiors, snow covering the ground for 8 months of the year, winters where food becomes desperately scarce, where survival requires either a 1,000-mile migration or the physiological capacity to endure months of near-total fasting. The evidence says yes, we have fossil sites. The Prince Creek Formation in northern Alaska preserves a diverse dinosaur ecosystem from roughly 70 million years ago. Hadrosaurs, ceratopsians, tyrannosaurs, all living year-round above the Arctic Circle. Above the Arctic Circle, at latitudes that would have experienced months of winter darkness and temperatures that regularly dropped below freezing. These weren't occasional visitors. They were established breeding populations, raising young in conditions that would kill most modern reptiles. They survived because of feathers. We've known for decades that many dinosaurs were feathered, but the scope of this is broader than most people realize. Feather-like integuments have been found on tyrannosaurs, on ceratopsians, on ornithischians from across the family tree. The original function of feathers wasn't flight, it was insulation. Feathers evolved to trap body heat against the skin, to keep animals warm in conditions that would otherwise be lethally cold. And modern birds, living dinosaurs, thrive in the coldest environments on Earth. Penguins survive in Antarctica. Snowy owls hunt in Arctic darkness. Emperor penguins incubate eggs in conditions that would kill a human without specialized equipment. The adaptations required for Pleistocene survival wouldn't have required dinosaurs to become something fundamentally different. They would have required them to become more of what they already were. There's a biological principle called Bergmann's rule that describes what cold does to large animals over evolutionary time. Within a lineage, individuals in colder climates tend to be larger. The reason is straightforward thermodynamics. A larger body has a smaller surface area relative to its volume, which means it loses heat more slowly. In a cold environment, being big is an advantage. You can retain body heat, you can store more fat, you can endure conditions that would kill a smaller animal. Bergmann's rule shaped the Ice Age megafauna of our timeline. Woolly mammoths were larger than their tropical elephant relatives. Cave bears dwarfed modern brown bears. The Irish elk carried antlers spanning 3.5 meters, absurdly, almost comically oversized, but supported by a body massive enough to carry them. Cold made giants, and in our alternate timeline, cold would make very different giants. Picture the ceratopsians of the Pleistocene steppe. 60 million years evolved from their Cretaceous ancestors. The basic body plan is still recognizable. 4 legs, beaked face, the characteristic silhouette of a horned dinosaur. But the scale has changed. A full-grown adult might measure 10 meters from beak to tail, standing 2.5 meters at the shoulder, weighing 8 or 9 metric tons. Its horns are shorter than those of Triceratops, less ornate, more functional, weapons for defense and competition rather than display structures for attracting mates, and covering its entire body, from the tip of its beaked nose to the end of its tail, is a dense coat of feathery integument. Not the elaborate plumage of a tropical bird, but the thick, insulating down of an animal built for survival in extreme cold. From a distance, in the snow, this creature would look almost mammalian. That shaggy, barrel-shaped silhouette, that cloud of frozen breath in the Arctic air. Up close, the silhouette betrays it. The 4-legged stance, the beaked face, the unmistakable horns. These animals would have moved in herds that darkened the horizon, not dozens or hundreds, thousands, rivers of flesh and horn flowing across the mammoth steppe, following the seasonal pulse of vegetation growth. In summer, pushing north into the high Arctic, grazing on the explosion of plant life that the endless daylight produced. In winter, retreating south, congregating in valleys where snow was less deep and some vegetation remained accessible. The scale of these migrations would have been staggering. Millions of animals moving in synchrony across thousands of kilometers. One of the great wildlife spectacles in the history of life on this planet. The predators would have matched them. A Pleistocene tyrannosaur, descended from the pack-hunting lineages of the Miocene, would have been a creature of nightmares in the most literal sense, smaller than its Cretaceous ancestors, perhaps 5 or 6 meters long, 1.5 to 2 tons, but covered in a thick coat of white and gray feathers that rendered it nearly invisible against a snowy backdrop. Moving in coordinated packs of 6 to 12 individuals, communicating through calls and body language, coordinating hunts with a tactical sophistication that had been evolving for 20 million years. When prey was abundant, they would hunt aggressively, taking down even the largest ceratopsians through coordinated assault. When prey was scarce, in the depths of winter, they might have been able to slow their metabolism and enter a torpor-like state. Not true hibernation, but something analogous, surviving on stored fat until spring brought new opportunities. The dromaeosaurids, the raptor dinosaurs, would have been widespread on the open steppes, hunting in larger packs, taking down mid-sized prey through sheer persistence. Imagine a pack of 30 Pleistocene dromaeosaurids, each one perhaps 1.5 meters long, covered in streaked winter camouflage feathers, pursuing a herd of ornithomimid descendants across a frozen plain. Their strategy: identify a target animal, pursue it in relays, some running at full speed to maintain pressure, while others rest and then sprint to the front until exhaustion and hypothermia bring it down. The same strategy used by African wild dogs in our timeline. Devastatingly effective. Metabolically efficient. Impossible to escape from unless you can sustain faster speeds than your pursuers indefinitely. No animal can. The land bridges that formed during glacial periods, Beringia connecting Asia and North America, the reduction of the channel between Britain and Europe, would have served as highways for dinosaur migration, the same way they served mammoths and early humans in our timeline. Tyrannosaur lineages from Siberia and Alaska would have been genetically connected. Ceratopsian populations from Mongolia and Wyoming would have mingled during warm periods and separated during cold ones, accumulating genetic differences that might eventually produce new species. The glacial cycles would have been a pump, pushing populations together, pulling them apart, driving diversification at an accelerated pace. The tropical refugia, patches of warm forest surviving near the equator even during glacial maxima, would have preserved lineages that never adapted to the cold. In the Amazon basin, in Central Africa, in Southeast Asia, you might have found dinosaurs that looked almost Cretaceous, sauropods browsing in the forest canopy, small theropods hunting in the understory, a world that time had almost forgotten. These refugia would have been islands of biodiversity, preserving ancient forms and serving as sources for recolonization when the ice retreated. The seas would have had their own Pleistocene fauna. The mosasaur and plesiosaur lineages, now diversified into dozens of species over 66 million years of additional evolution, would have navigated the cold, productive waters of the glacial oceans. Some might have developed thick blubber layers for insulation, converging on the body plans of the seals and sea lions that fill those niches in our timeline. Others might have been seasonal migrants, following prey between tropical and temperate waters the way great whales do today. The largest descendants of the Mesozoic marine reptiles, those filter-feeding plesiosaur giants we imagined in the Eocene oceans, might have rivaled the great whales in size, perhaps exceeded them. The productive polar seas during interglacials, with their blooms of krill and small fish, would have provided enormous resource bases for any animal capable of harvesting them efficiently. A 30-meter filter feeder cruising the Pleistocene North Pacific, its 4 enormous flippers beating slowly like vast underwater wings. That is a creature that has no analog in the world we know. The Ice Ages would not have destroyed the alternate dinosaur lineages. They would have transformed them, pushed them to evolve solutions to problems their ancestors never faced. Produced giants that would have made the woolly mammoth look modest, created ecosystem dynamics of a complexity and productivity that the Mesozoic never saw. The Pleistocene would have been not the beginning of the end for the dinosaurs, but the apotheosis. Their greatest chapter, their finest hour, a moment of magnificent, terrible flourishing that no human being would ever witness. Stand on a hilltop in what we would recognize as East Africa in the year 2026. The geography is familiar, the same mountains, the same great rift lakes, the same volcanic plateaus that, in our timeline, gave birth to the human species. The map is the map you know, but the world on that map is something you have never seen. No cities on the horizon, no roads, no agricultural fields replacing the savanna, no aircraft making white lines across the sky, no ships on the Indian Ocean, no dams on the rivers, no lights visible from orbit because there is no one looking from orbit. There is no one. Not nowhere. The mammals are still here, in all their hidden niches, all their nocturnal and subterranean and high canopy specializations. The primates, if they exist, are small, shy, arboreal creatures that have never descended to the ground in 66 million years. Clever, maybe. Curious, certainly. But as far from building civilizations as we are from building stars. The world belongs to the dinosaurs, as it has for 230 million years. Let's tour it. East Africa is the obvious starting point because in our timeline, it's the setting for the most impressive concentration of megafauna on Earth, and the same ecology that made the modern Serengeti works in the alternate world, because the underlying geology, the volcanic soils, the seasonal rainfall patterns, the vast open grasslands stretching to the horizon, is the same. What's different is the cast. The great herds of ceratopsians fill the grasslands the way wildebeest and zebra fill ours. Some are enormous, the largest approaching elephant proportions, their bodies covered in sparse feathery integument adapted to the tropical heat rather than the Arctic cold. Others are smaller and faster, moving in larger herds that rely on vigilance and numbers for protection. Still others fill the mixed woodland edge habitat, browsing on the acacia trees and shrubs that border the grasslands. The ornithomimid descendants, the grassland runners, the ecological analogues of antelope and gazelle, are present in enormous numbers, their herds moving in coordinated waves across the open plains, their heads constantly rising to scan the horizon for the approach of pack hunters. And there are pack hunters. Oh, there are pack hunters. The tyrannosaur descendants of the modern alternate world are nothing like the animals we see in museums. 6 million years of further evolution since the Pleistocene, 6 million years of continued refinement of the cooperative hunting strategies that have been honing themselves for 25 million years, have produced something I genuinely don't have a good comparison for in our natural history. They hunt in groups of 8 to 12. They communicate constantly, using a repertoire of calls and visual signals that encodes information about prey location, prey health, pack member positions, and tactical intent. When they hunt, they don't chase, they manage. They position themselves around a herd, using the herd's own flight responses to funnel individual animals toward ambush positions they've already established. Individual pack members have specialized roles that they execute with apparent understanding of the larger strategy. The pack functions as something close to a single organism spread across kilometers of grassland. This is not instinct. This is not pure instinct anyway. Some of it is learned. The young hunt with their parents for years before being integrated into adult pack dynamics. Successful tactics are passed from generation to generation in a process that, viewed from the outside, looks recognizably like teaching. Move north, across the Sahara, which is not the Sahara we know. In a world where the global climate was never significantly altered by industrial carbon emissions, the Pleistocene Ice Age cycle would still be at work, and the current interglacial warm period would have produced a green Sahara, wet with seasonal monsoons, covered in the kind of savanna that once existed there in our own Holocene. The ceratopsian herds would graze across it in numbers that would be almost incomprehensible to a human observer. The rivers that ran through the alternate Sahara would have been patrolled by mosasaur descendants in the estuaries and lower reaches, and by the enormous aquatic forms of other lineages in the deeper channels. Cross the Mediterranean, still here, still Mediterranean-shaped, though its fauna would be completely different. The islands would have served as biological refugia during glacial periods, preserving isolated lineages that evolved in complete independence from the mainland. Island dinosaurs, following the island rule, evolving toward smaller body sizes when resources are limited, might have produced miniature forms that would look almost toy-like beside their continental relatives. Dwarf ceratopsians the size of large dogs, miniature theropods that hunted the island's birds and small reptiles. Europe would be covered in temperate forests and grasslands, populated by the descendants of the Pleistocene giants. Somewhat smaller in this warmer interglacial, their heavy cold-weather insulation thinned, their body sizes reduced from the extreme cold period maximum, but still unmistakably large, unmistakably diverse, unmistakably dominant. Asia holds some of the most interesting alternate fauna, because Asia in the real world is where the greatest dinosaur diversity of the late Cretaceous lived. The Gobi Desert, which in the alternate timeline would have been much more vegetated during this interglacial, would have been roamed by the descendants of the remarkable Mongolian dinosaur assemblage, a fauna as distinctive from North American dinosaurs as modern African wildlife is from South American. Cross to the Americas, and you find something that parallels the great faunal exchange that happened in our timeline when the Isthmus of Panama connected North and South America around 3 million years ago. South America spent much of the Cenozoic isolated, and in our alternate timeline, the isolation would have produced unique dinosaur lineages that would have encountered North American dinosaurs for the first time when the land connection formed. Perhaps sauropods would have persisted in South America. The long-necked giants had been declining in diversity in the northern continents since the Cretaceous, not because anything was wrong with them, but because the forests that supported them were beginning to fragment. In the isolated continent of South America, in the vast tropical forests of the Amazon basin, they might have continued their evolution undisturbed, reaching forms that make the Jurassic giants look modest. A 70 or 80 million year tradition of sauropod evolution, with all the refinements it might produce in neck structure, feeding apparatus, social behavior, reproductive strategy, unleashed on a continent that never saw a significant extinction event. What would those animals have looked like? The neck would almost certainly have been longer, more mobile, more precisely controlled than in any known sauropod. 60 million years of selection pressure in dense forests, where the ability to thread that neck through gaps and canopy layers to reach particular food sources would have been rewarded relentlessly. The body might have been smaller, more nimble, better suited to the tangled three-dimensional structure of tropical forest, in contrast to the open country giants of the north. The collision between the South American and North American dinosaur faunas would have been one of the great biogeographical events of the alternate Cenozoic, the Great Dinosaurian Exchange, producing extinctions and replacements and novel combinations that would have reshaped the ecology of both continents for millions of years. Australia presents the most alien case of all. In our timeline, Australia's isolation produced the most distinctive mammalian fauna on Earth, marsupials and monotremes, animals that went their own evolutionary way when Australia separated from Antarctica and drifted northward, developing independently for 45 million years. In our alternate timeline, Australia would have separated from Antarctica with whatever dinosaur fauna happened to be present at the time of separation, and that fauna would have evolved in complete isolation ever since. An Australian dinosaur, 45 million years into independent evolution, might be entirely unrecognizable. Not just different in the way that kangaroos are different from deer, completely, fundamentally different as a kangaroo is from a fish. We can say almost nothing specific about what it would look like, except that it would be unlike anything that has ever evolved anywhere else on Earth. The oceans of the alternate modern world complete the picture. The great filter feeders cruise the productive high-latitude seas, their enormous bodies supported by cold, krill-rich waters. Smaller mosasaur descendants fill the roles of dolphins and porpoises in coastal waters, fast, playful, intensely social, hunting fish in cooperative groups with tactics that make the cetacean repertoire look simple. At the base of underwater cliffs, in the twilight zone where sunlight fades to nothing, creatures have evolved over 200 million years of continuous marine adaptation into forms that no paleontologist has ever imagined, because no paleontologist has ever had occasion to consider what would happen if the mosasaur and plesiosaur lineages were given the same 200 million years of Cenozoic ocean to work with that the fish lineages actually got. The depths are particularly alien. In the deepest ocean trenches, in the Hadal zone below 6,000 meters, where pressure would crush a submarine and temperatures hover near freezing, creatures descended from Cretaceous marine reptiles might have evolved over geological time into something that resembles nothing in either our fossil record or our modern oceans. Deep-sea evolution follows its own rules. The constraints of darkness and pressure and scarce food create convergent forms that look nothing like their surface relatives. The deep-sea descendants of the great Mesozoic marine reptiles might be the most alien things on this planet, or any planet we've yet discovered. And above all of it, above the seas and the grasslands, and the forests and the Arctic tundra, the sky belongs to the pterosaurs and the birds. The pterosaurs, 66 million years further evolved than their Cretaceous ancestors, would be a diverse and globally distributed lineage, filling every aerial niche, from soaring ocean predators to tiny insectivores hunting in forest understory. The giants would be somewhat smaller than Quetzalcoatlus. The Pleistocene cold seems to have pushed aerial animals toward more efficient, less extreme proportions, but still enormous by any standard we know. An 8-meter wingspan is unremarkable for a soaring species above the open ocean. The birds, meanwhile, actual birds, the one dinosaur lineage that actually did survive the real extinction, would have evolved in a world that never gave them the opportunity to become dominant. In our timeline, birds diversified dramatically after the extinction of their non-avian relatives, filling many of the niches that the dinosaurs had previously occupied. In our alternate timeline, those niches were never vacant. The birds would have remained a successful but secondary lineage, numerous and diverse, but occupying only the fraction of ecological space that the pterosaurs and other flying dinosaur derivatives hadn't already claimed. This is the world. This is what 230 million years of continuous, uninterrupted dinosaur evolution produces. A world of staggering, almost incomprehensible biological complexity. Every niche filled by animals refined over geological time beyond anything the Cenozoic mammal radiation achieved. A world that has never known a plow, a road, a city, a satellite, a spoken language, a written word. A world that is, in the most fundamental sense, complete. And it is a world that contains absolutely no one who knows it is complete. No one to stand on that East African hilltop and feel awe. No one to wonder about the creatures in the valleys below, to want to understand them, to give them names. No consciousness capable of the specific kind of self-reflection that would allow a creature to look at a herd of ceratopsians flowing across a plain and think, "This is beautiful." The beauty exists. The wonder exists objectively as a property of the world. But there is no one to receive it. Is that loss, or is it simply difference? The absence of humans from this alternate world isn't just an ecological fact. It's a profound philosophical statement about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the universe. In our timeline, human beings are, as far as we know, the only entities in the known universe capable of wondering about the universe. We are the universe's only known mechanism for self-reflection, the only process through which the cosmos can, in some limited sense, observe and understand itself. Carl Sagan put it famously, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." The atoms in your body were forged in the hearts of dying stars. When you look up at the night sky and feel awe, you are stardust contemplating stardust. The universe is, through you, becoming aware of its own existence. In our alternate timeline, that doesn't happen. The universe proceeds. The stars are born and die. Galaxies collide and merge. Planets form around new suns. The Earth goes through its cycles of glaciation and warmth. And the dinosaurs adapt and thrive and fill every available niche. Life achieves extraordinary complexity, extraordinary beauty. extraordinary ecological richness, but nowhere in this process does any of it become aware that it is happening. The universe is blind to itself. Is that a loss? Is the universe diminished by its own blindness? This is not a scientific question. Science can tell us what the alternate world would have contained, but it can't tell us whether a world without observers is lesser than a world with them. That depends on what you think observers are for. If consciousness is just a physical process, a sufficiently complex information processing system that happens to produce the experience of being aware, then its presence or absence doesn't change the value of the world it exists in. The world is what it is, regardless of whether anything is watching. But if consciousness matters, if there's something it is like to be aware of a thing, and if that something is valuable in a way that the mere existence of the thing is not, then the alternate world really is lesser. Not because it lacks ceratopsians, or pack-hunting tyrannosaurs, or deep-sea plesiosaur descendants, but because it lacks the thing that makes any of those remarkable creatures remarkable, an observer to recognize their remarkableness. The ceratopsian herds flowing across the alternate Miocene plains are objectively as extraordinary as anything that has ever existed on this planet. The cooperative intelligence of the alternate Pleistocene Troodontids is, by any physical measure, as complex and sophisticated as any behavior in our natural world. The alternate deep sea, populated by 200 million year refined reptilian forms, is as rich and strange as any environment we could imagine. But without anyone to see it, it goes unseen. Without anyone to feel something about it, it passes unfelt. Without anyone to give it names and tell stories about it and preserve its memory against the relentless erasure of geological time, it happens and unhappens without leaving any record other than the physical one written in rock. We are here. That fact is extraordinary. Not because we're better than the dinosaurs. We're not, by the only objective measure that matters, which is evolutionary fitness sustained over geological time, but because we can know that the dinosaurs existed, because we can recover them from the rock, reconstruct their forms and behaviors, tell their stories, feel something about their vanishing. We are the custodians of deep time. We are the ones who remember. Every extinction that ever occurred on this planet went unwitnessed until we arrived and began reading the rock record. The Great Dying of the Permian, which wiped out 96% of marine species, we know about it because we found the gap in the fossil record, the layer of rock where the diversity suddenly plunges and slowly recovers. The Ordovician extinction, the Devonian extinction, the End Triassic event, all of them recorded in stone, waiting for a creature with the cognitive tools to decode the record. We are the archive and the archivist. We are the thing that gives meaning to deep time by recovering it and preserving it in a form that can be transmitted forward. In the alternate timeline, all of that is lost. Not because the alternate organisms are less, but because they produce no consciousness capable of the specific function of retrospective witness. This is why the alternate timeline, for all its magnificence, and it would have been magnificent, make no mistake, is somehow lesser than our own improbable, contingent, asteroid-facilitated reality. not because we are better, but because we are here. And being here, being aware, being the kind of thing that can stand on a hilltop and feel something about the vastness of time and the contingency of existence, that is the most remarkable thing the universe has yet managed to do with the matter it's been accumulating for 13.5 billion years. Go outside tonight, look up, the same stars, the same universe. But this time, this one extraordinary time, something is looking back. Here is the thought I want to leave you with, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before the lights come back up and the world reasserts itself. You are here, not just here in a general sense, alive on Earth in the 21st century, but here specifically. Aware, thinking, capable of following this narrative across 340 million years of alternate geological time. Capable of feeling something when you think about a world that no one is there to appreciate. That capacity, the capacity to imagine worlds that never existed, to feel something about them, to ask whether they are beautiful or terrible or neither, is what makes you human. And it exists because of a rock. Not just any rock. A specific rock, approximately 10 kilometers in diameter, composed of carbonite and iron, that had been traveling through the outer solar system for the better part of 4 billion years, perturbed by Jupiter's gravity and the slow drift of its own orbital eccentricity, until it arrived at Earth's vicinity on a particular Tuesday morning 66 million years ago, and struck the shallow, coastal waters of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula at 20 kilometers per second. If that rock had arrived 60 seconds earlier or later, it would have struck deep ocean, the sulfur would have dissolved, the sun would have kept shining, the dinosaurs would have woken up to an ordinary Wednesday, and you would not exist. Not just you specifically, not just the particular combination of experiences and memories and relationships that make you who you are. The entire lineage that led to you would have remained what it had been for 150 million years. Small, nocturnal, ecologically marginal. The mammals that were your distant ancestors would never have gotten their chance. The specific selection pressures that drove the expansion of the primate brain, the descent from trees, the savanna, the social complexity, the stone tools, the fire, the language, none of it would have happened in a world where the dinosaurs never left. Human consciousness is not the inevitable product of evolution. It is not the destination toward which life was always moving. It is a contingency, an accident, in the sense that all history is accident, the compounding of countless small events, none of which individually seemed significant. The rock that killed the dinosaurs also created the conditions that made you possible. This is the paradox at the heart of the thought experiment we've been conducting. The very fact that you can imagine the world where the asteroid missed, the fact that you can populate it with feathered ice age giants and cooperative pack hunters and deep-sea reptile descendants, can feel the strangeness of a world without human observers, can ask whether that world is somehow lesser for having no one to appreciate it, proves that the asteroid hit, proves that the dinosaurs died, proves that the improbable sequence of events that produced your particular form of consciousness actually occurred. There is no one in our alternate timeline to run this thought experiment. There is no one there to wonder about the world that should have been. There is no one to lie awake at night considering the contingency of their own existence, the extraordinary improbability of being here at all, the weight of the fact that the universe produced something capable of being aware of itself. That awareness is the rarest thing in this story, maybe the rarest thing in the universe. The dinosaurs were magnificent. 230 million years of evolutionary triumph, surviving asteroid impacts and volcanic winters and continental rearrangements and ice ages, filling every ecological niche on a planet that kept changing under their feet, producing forms of beauty and terror and strangeness that we can only begin to imagine. They were the most successful large animals in the history of life. They were extraordinary, but they never wondered why they were extraordinary. They never looked up at the same stars that still wheel overhead tonight and asked what they were or how far away they might be. They never told each other stories. They never built anything that would last beyond the season. You are here because they died. That is a strange and beautiful and terrible thing to hold in your mind. The asteroid hit, the dust rose, the sun went dark, the plants died. The food chain collapsed. 3/4 of all species on Earth vanished. And in the ecological wreckage that followed, a lineage of small nocturnal mammals that had been hiding under the feet of the giants for 150 million years finally got its chance. 66 million years later, here you are, wondering about the world that never was, feeling something about creatures that never got to become what they might have been. Asking questions that no dinosaur, however intelligent, would ever have known to ask. The tragedy of the alternate timeline isn't that the dinosaurs didn't produce a technological civilization. It's that there was no one there to grieve the ones that went extinct along the way. No one to document them. No one to say, this one mattered. This one was remarkable. This one deserved to be remembered. In our timeline, we can do that. We can dig their bones from the rock. We can reconstruct their shapes and their behaviors and their ecologies. We can tell their story. We can feel something about the world they built over 165 million years of evolutionary achievement, and mourn the fact that a rock from space erased it in a geological instant. That mourning is uniquely human. That grief is the gift of consciousness. Go outside tonight if you can. Find somewhere dark enough to see the stars. Look up at the same sky that T-Rex looked up at 66 million years ago, before the light in that sky became the last thing it ever saw. The stars haven't moved much. The constellations are almost the same. The universe is as indifferent as it has always been. But you are not indifferent. And that specific fact, that one exception to the universal indifference, might be the most remarkable thing the universe has ever produced. The asteroid hit, the dinosaurs died, and the universe finally got something that could look back at it. If you've stayed with this story to the end, if you found yourself wondering about the alternate world we built together, if you felt something when we walked through those Miocene grasslands and those Pleistocene tundras and that modern East African savanna that no human being will ever see, then you understand something important about what makes us different from every other creature this planet has ever produced. We can imagine worlds that don't exist. We can care about creatures that never evolved. We can grieve for possibilities that never became realities. The dinosaurs are gone, but they're not forgotten, because we are here to remember them. That's not nothing. That might be everything.